This program is designed to provide general information with regards to the subject matters covered. This information is given with the understanding that neither the hosts, guests, sponsors, or station are engaged in rendering any specific and personal, medical, financial, legal, counseling, professional service, or any advice. You should seek the services of competent professionals before applying or trying any suggested ideas. Ahoy! Captain David Gallimore welcomes you aboard the Regenerate Show, live Mondays, 10 a.m. Pacific on K4HD Radio at k4hd.com. We dive into the real messy work of transforming our lives, leadership, and organizations. Bring your hot mess and confusion. Leave with clarity, courage, and confidence. Together, let's strengthen our resilience, accelerating the health of ourselves, people, planet, and profits. Now, here's your host, Captain Dave, your personal regenerator. All aboard!
Ahoy, and welcome. I am so delighted to have you here today. This is going to be a bit of a different show. We're going to be talking to one of my dear friends and respected colleagues, Thor Olson, about climate and some of the changes that he's been seeing as a trained geologist. Geologists are very patient people, and he's got some terrific insights to share. As many of you know, the purpose of the Regenerate Show is to help lift up through sharing stories about the messy middle of personal, professional, and or organizational transformation. Because my belief is if we're healthier as individuals, healthier as families and organizations and communities, that we might be willing to put our planet, our only home, a little bit higher on the priority list. So what is regeneration, you may ask? Well, my definition continues to evolve as I learn and live, but basically it draws from the 3.8 billion years of life's own logic, restoring vitality across every living system we inhabit, from ourselves and our families to our teams, organizations, and communities. The secret to regeneration, I believe, is learning from people who are living it. They're in the mud, their fingernails are dirty, in the messy middle, not from a polished or performative summit looking out and sharing us, hey, just follow this formula, and you too could be whatever you want to be. I think it's more useful to hear what real people are experiencing day to day. So we'll get to hear a little bit about Thor's origin story and how he's been pivoting and transitioning from a geology degree from the University of Colorado at Boulder, and then spent a fair amount of time in tech at Microsoft as a senior development leader. And most recently doing some service work in the community, as well as a lot of really interesting speeches that he's been able to share to educate people on what he's seeing and how the Earth is changing from a kind of that geologist perspective. So thank you for being here. If you're a longtime crew member on this voyage, I appreciate you deeply. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome aboard. And I hope you discover something today that changes how you see yourself and perhaps our planet, especially given today's topic. So our theme today is the courage to look, the discipline to act. So most of us cope with our biggest challenges, the health of our planet, biodiversity loss, the stresses and strains on our health, and the disparities and injustices that have been ever present in our communities. As I learned from President and Michelle Obama when they opened up their presidential center last week, the arc of justice takes a long time, but it generally bends toward justice. So hopefully you'll be inspired from this show to take a different look at how your behavior might be impacting our planet. So people are wired to look away from what frightens us, but that makes the problems really not going away, right? So Tor does the opposite. Um, he looks at satellite data, and he's going to do a little bit of a demo of that later in our show, showing how the ice and rising temperatures and other key metrics are really changing quite quickly. But this is only one step. So in this episode, Tor and I are going to take a look at his somewhat informal, but I love how he thinks about change and managing change. It's a 5-step process to move from overwhelm to action: identifying the problem, digging for the truth, being focused on facts and primary sources, reflecting, yes, meditating. So he brings a spiritual side to this, validating with others, and then finally sharing what you learned. Because if you just keep it within yourself, it's kind of hard to help influence and make a better world. So we'll learn a little bit about some of the stories that Tor has been sharing. So our promise is to have fun today, to leave you inspired, and to leave you with just one thing you can apply before you go to sleep tonight. So grab a pen. Transformations happen here. I'd like to now welcome to Regenerate my friend and very thought-provoking associate of mine, Thor Olson.
Morning, sir.
Hello, hello. So happy Monday. I'm sure you had a busy time, and I appreciate you taking time to join us. So we always like to start the show with the first question, which is, what lights you up? What's that one thing, if you only had one thing that really lit you up, what is that gives you the most joy?
There's not one thing. It's a whole range of things.
But given time, what's that one thing?
I love to go out at about 4 a.m. in the twilight. It is the most still and calm point in the day. Now, in the summertime, that's earlier, but it's just so tranquil at that moment. And that, to me, is the best way to start a day. I mentioned that because I have daughters, I have a whole bunch of things. There's a whole bunch of things that give me delight. And so I'd run out of fingers very fast. But that stands out to me as a moment of calm. And all I have to do is step out the door to see it, feel it.
Yeah. Bonus if you can do it with another person. But they're probably not up at 4 a.m.
Yeah, but even so, it's just a quiet moment because most people, even if they're up, they're not awake.
Yeah.
You're in that half state between where you're awake and not.
And the next question that I always love to help our listeners get to know you just a little bit better, Tor, is how did you become who you are so far? What's your origin story?
Oh, my origin story is essentially a constant reinvention. I grew up in Oakland, California during the 70s, which is a very fraught time. There were a lot of very severe problems and troubles. I lost an awful lot of classmates from my junior school and high school. They just got into things that led to a very short life. Mm-hmm. I moved to Colorado to go to University of Colorado. I did not graduate in geology, but I studied economics, geology, and history under a suite of amazing professors. And I have a very good memory. So I took what they taught me and continued to learn ever since. So that was in the middle of the 80s, and here we are 40 years later. And I've stayed in touch with them, many of them. I've, leveraged what they've taught me. Ted Scambos was my teacher's assistant. He is the lead researcher in Antarctica. And my professors spent about half their time talking about their theories of the future. That was just a thing in the middle 80s at the University of Colorado. My economics professor was Ruben Zubro, and he would give these fiery speeches about what it was like to be in the White House during an economic crisis and how economic theory could only get you so far. So I've tried to honor all of these great professors, and much of what I present today is in a way leveraging what they exposed me to. And it's a very dynamic thing to learn. Yeah, Zubro was adamant to say, in a crisis, you have to look at the facts. You cannot rely on theory.
Yeah.
And my geology professors were largely from the oil and gas industry. They were trying to call attention because they knew if they spoke out, they would be fired. That was just a reality. The oil industry has tentacles everywhere, trying to, well, let's just say, keep the message in a way they can handle. And there's a big split between the geology branch, the atmospheric branch, which is the IPC, and 99% of what you read about climate is about the atmospheric branch. It's the gases in the atmosphere. And then there's a middle branch. It's quite small, but it's noteworthy. It's the oceanographers, Woods Hole, Scripps, and the Woods Hole Institute. And I remember they did a very detailed study of ocean current acceleration. And then I saw it merely get, distracted over the years. So you have a lot of controversy in these other two branches because we don't all agree.
The other part of your origin story, just briefly, before we deep dive into what you're passionate about recently and the 5-step process that you've created, you have a lovely and very, very smart daughter. And I know that has been a big part of your origin story, helping somewhat as a single parent until recently, and now once again. Do you want to just speak briefly about the joys and the challenges and how being a dad, since we're one day after Father's Day?
Started off with what I kind of loosely call vitamin satire and vitamin tragedy. My first son was afflicted with spinal muscle atrophy. He lived 118 days with my first marriage. And I had a second daughter a year later. But my wife really struggled with the grief.
Yeah.
That just, grieving is a very complicated process, sometimes over a decade. Some people never get over it. But anyhow, that was the first chapter. Then many years later, I got remarried. I had a son that lived 9 days of a very rare condition, a cord prolapse on the arterial side. And then I adopted a daughter because my wife was not able to have another kid. And so, and she couldn't quite take the grief. So in each of these, I had to learn how to be a parent in a demanding circumstance. What I learned from my first daughter, they're 13 years apart, I applied to my second daughter. What I learned from my first situation, I applied to my second situation. My wife, we got into international trade business after I left Microsoft. Again, Microsoft is a very stressful place to work. And at times that can just get crazy. And I noticed when I left Microsoft, it was just like I was shaking. I didn't really catch on to the stress I was under until I left.
Yeah.
I was working in the tax and internal audit divisions. I was the sole dev manager in internal audit. I had access to everything in the company at one point. Even Steve Ballmer didn't have the access I had. Now, with that comes a great responsibility, what I almost kind of like chains. And although it was an illustrious position, it was extremely stressful. And I felt like I had 6 bosses.
Yeah.
And at some point, that just wears you out. So here I am. We did an international trade business. My wife moved to Taiwan, and for better parts of 12 years, we were shipping cargo until a demographic problem in Asia and COVID, they just stopped buying. And a lot of stories, she ran it into the ground because she was not willing to give up. The idea that if you just keep trying higher, well, no, she ran us basically out of money. So we're in a very humble state now. You can see this arc and, I call it the bounce. But along the way, I've been giving presentations about, how we're going to electrify, demographic issues, how we're going to handle that, how we're going to handle climate change. Because the more you give a presentation, the more you try to speak about what you know and discuss, perversely, the more you learn and the better you get at it.
Thor, was your inspiration to do this kind of research and evangelize your wonderful stories and share what you learn Was it inspired by your two daughters and how to leave the world just a little bit better for them?
It's partly them. My older daughter is a biologist. She studied botany. Every time we go for a walk, she'll name all the plants and tell me how they're changing. It's like going to a game where you don't know anything about the game, but she can, oh no, this is the movement here, and this is, and it's taking over here. And it's just like, wow, change is all around us, but most of the time we can't see it.
No.
The second is, put it short, I had an evil brother. And I mean by that, I talked to him about every day for 35 years. He was 6 years older than me. He studied statistics and industrial engineering, worked in the Air Force on the jets, electronic systems. And he too had kind of multiple upsets in his life. But we stayed very close, and we would discuss, we'd chew up anything in the news. It was Wall Street Journal, Business Week, all these other things. And because we had a family software company, it was called the Cast Pajamas a long time ago, and we worked together. And we learned to read articles to figure out what was the bias of the author, what did they really emphasize, what did they leave out. And so he passed away some years ago, but I've been keeping up with that to say, who can you gauge in those kind of conversations? And how can we develop all the skills that I've developed by talking to him and other people and raising my daughters? And how can we apply that to all the problems around us?
Well, in fact, this is what gives me so much joy in our relationship is the back and forth, the banter, challenging our own thinking. I so appreciate that.
Yeah, you don't grow by just staying alone.
No.
I mean, you hit all kinds of walls.
Yeah. Well, it's bias, right? We each, just to navigate our lives, we all have bias. Mine's optimism bias and sunk cost bias and recency bias. So it's helpful to have somebody like you that has different biases than me.
Well, but experience comes in many forms. I remember the story of two guys in Minnesota that grew up near a frozen pond. And they played hockey with each other, and it was just the two of them, and they challenged each other, and they both became world-class hockey players because they had the other guy to challenge them, and each upped their game, and they climbed.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
my brother and I kind of did that game. And so I show up at a meeting of the Electricity Brain Trust, all the leading lights of the U.S. power grid, and they've got a thick report on all the details. It's about 3 or 4 years old. And I call them about how are you integrating grid scale batteries into your plan and how it's changing the transmission electricity and all these other things. And a long pause. And one of the leaders said, damn, there it is. It's out of date. So you have to be current on a lot of these things. And by fortune, I happen to follow along in all these categories. I just sort of been trained to do it because, I was always figuring out, what am I going to talk to my brother next? What can I, because we would bait each other. He'd make up stuff to see if I could catch him. He'd accuse me of causing some great problem, and I'd have to tell him my evil plan to cause it. You get inside of the news, you make it personal. You get inside the minds of world leaders to see, because being a leader is a very complicated thing.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you have to play act them to kind of get a feel for why they make the decisions they do.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about the process that I kind of ticked off, just a little bit at the start of the show where, you're being curious and you're trying to figure out what the challenges are. And then you gather data. And after the break, I'd love to have you show our audience the website that you've shared with me several times that really opened my eyes as to, boy, the climate is definitely impacting our planet. But that first part of your process, do you want to just speak to, your curiosity and
Yes.
and your interest in getting facts?
Well, I learned this I mean, my professors just sort of laid it all, but, and so all these years later, 40 years later, I just wanted to see if they were right.
Yeah.
So maybe that identify is part inspiration. Because if you're around people that provoke you to focus on things, I mean, I can see this in business. You go in there and somebody says, your morale is low. I said, what is morale? How do you keep that up in a business? Like you're in Louisiana and say erosion, hurricanes are going to damage you. And this is, I don't see a hurricane today, but you can read up about hurricanes. It inspires you. What are the dynamics of hurricanes? How does the ocean affect hurricanes and other things? There's a controversy here in the Seattle area about the forests. My daughter calls out that they clear cut it and the trees grew up and they're very dense and all the branches lock with each other. In a fire, then indigenous people never allowed the trees to touch because they knew if one tree caught on fire, it would set the other.
Yeah.
We have unlearned that. We love the forests. They're beautiful. They're lush. But in a drought, that could become very dangerous.
Yeah.
So you got to ask these questions. How does that work out? What risk do you take? And the more you do it, the better you get at it. I mean, when geologists meet, we talk about, oh, do you see this evidence for this extinction and all that? Because it's like the biggest train wreck in history. But here we are today talking because of those big events.
Yeah.
Without this big extinction, there'd be dinosaurs. So I kind of just loosely say part of that identify is inspiration, and part of it is just to accept there is satire in the world. There is tragedy. And you just got to be able to look without saying judgment. Because when you get into say that's good or bad, you kind of blind yourself to what is.
That is such a key point that you make. I know when I get certain about something, the learning basically stops.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yet there's so many layers to difficult policy decisions. As a concerned citizen, we're trying to sort the fake news, the noise, so that we can get the signal, the truth. And these all take time and effort. So yeah, the role that you have played in my life, which I'm so grateful, is I share a link and you and I then noodle on it separately. You often will write quite an extensive reply to that, which I'm always interested in reading your thoughts. And then we have a discussion about it. And I always get wiser. I get more articulate. I get clearer in my own thinking. And I hope that our listeners can, just maybe reflect on who do they have in their lives that provide that kind of mirror or sounding board or curmudgeon,
Some of the curmudgeons.
respectful critic.
Yeah. Again, a person can be brilliant in one way and deeply flawed in another.
Yeah.
Some of the brightest people, what was this? Linus Paullus, he thought vitamin C would be the cure for everything.
Yeah.
Brilliant physicist, I don't remember, I remember the name. Maybe I'm mixing up people, but it is the pattern that the more brilliant you are, the more eccentric you are. And but even so, you can be inspired by some of the most humble people.
Yeah. Well, and to your earlier point about we've kind of lost knowledge about, for example, how forests need to be thinned to be healthier. My wife, who's Tlingit and Tahltan, and my daughter and son, because of her, we have really, really rich discussions about how the indigenous wisdom, we need to reconnect with a lot of that. If we did, we might have a healthier life and healthier community and certainly a healthier planet.
Yeah, again, each wisdom tradition has parts that are transcendent, meaning you can use them all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, Again, and you're right, the management of the forest is a very good one. Management of our resources, water. Again, if you are betting like it's good, there's a big Ogallala aquifer on the plains, and they're tapping it dry. And says, well, what's going to happen after the Ogallala goes dry? And the answer is it's not good.
Nope.
So you either manage these things in balance. We've kind of forgotten balance as a society.
Yeah. So what I'd like to do is we're going to go on just a short commercial break. And when we come back, we're going to be having an opportunity to experience what I get to experience quite often with Thor, which is he does the state of the state of the Southern Pole and what's the data really telling us. So stay tuned when we come back.
You're listening to Regenerate with Captain Dave, your personal regenerator on K4HD Radio. We'll be right back. Are you feeling overwhelmed? Are you ready to regenerate and live the life of your dreams? Start the transformation now. Call Captain Dave at 253-237-2558. Stop overthinking. Again, call 253-237-2558 or go to regenerativeworldgroup.com to book a free, no-obligation clarity call. Let's get back to Regenerate right here on K4HD Radio for more life-changing transformations. Here's your host, Captain Dave, your personal regenerator.
Welcome back. If you're just now joining us, my guest today is Thor Olson. He's a trained geologist, economist, general Renaissance man, if I can be so bold, and a master of many, by the way, not a master of none, and has been with me on and off for about 4.5 years. We met in a Toastmasters public speaking workshop every Friday, which was so transformative for me to learn from Thor through the many speeches that he gave. And we've been talking about his 5-step process that begins with being curious and finding out more about problems and getting to the facts, getting to the root cause. And so in that light, we're going to invite Rebel to present this website, and I'm going to have Thor just maybe orient us a little bit about what this website is and why you trust it so much. And then just take a few minutes and tell us the story that this latest version of the data, what story does it tell?
This website, which is hosted by the University of Maine, again, not a big name university or institution, it's the University of Maine. And they've set up this climate change institute where they collect all the current data from the satellites around the world, European satellites, American satellites, Asian satellites, and they compile it into a website that is more like a resource for other researchers to use. But it's updated daily, sometimes hourly, and you have a view of the global weather and multiple layers. It's just been an outstanding source. Prior to this, I used the Fleet Naval Meteorological Operations Center. They've shut that down recently, but that was the go-to source that I used for about 20 years. And then, because they had similar data, it was more for the naval use. They had a classified, which was for use on their operations, and a declassified that was, a day late, but still very useful. Because we were really tracking how much is warm air getting to the pole and cold air getting closer to the equator. Because one of my tests in geology was a hunk of wood, fossilized wood from Baffin Island. And explain this is from about 25 million years ago. And we had to do these elaborate weather models. Again, part of geology is figuring out how the climate worked to explain the rock that you have in your hands. So we deduced that it had to get enough heat flow in the winter that was about the middle Miocene back then, so that you could have trees grow, because if it gets too cold, they get brittle and they break. That's why you don't have trees in the Arctic. It gets too cold and things just snap. I mean, you know, it gets really cold.
Yep.
So if you click on the 2M temp anomaly, that's the 2-meter temperature anomaly on this this website. It's kind of a dynamic website.
So go ahead and you're driving the demo.
Okay, if I click on it.
Yep. Yep.
I can click on it.
You're going to click on the website that you're sharing. You can control it just as if, you know, you weren't sharing it.
Okay, I'm clicking on it.
So it's not updating. I wonder if you shared a different, do you want to just share your whole window as opposed to the specific website?
That might be easier. Yeah, let me just share my whole window.
Okay. Just make sure that none of your personal proprietary information is going to accidentally get displayed.
Share screen. There we go. Okay. Can you see it?
Rebel will put it up in just a moment.
Okay.
And then you have complete control now over that.
Yes.
Page.
Useful. Okay. This is the opening screen. You will be given a menu, but it's today's weather maps. And it starts in North America. I'll show you the 2-meter temperature anomaly. Again, this is done by satellite data, and it's showing you where it's warm. Right now, France is very warm over here. It's coming in about 14 to 18 degrees Celsius warmer than normal. Again, the scale here is in Celsius. The description is kind of terse, but this means that 2 meters, about 6 feet off the ground, what are the conditions, which is your standard measurement. If you look at precipitable water, that is the biggest change in the Arctic. Is you can see this bluish air is coming in between 20 and 40 kilograms of water per square meter. That's a square meter in a column to space. So the satellite is saying how much water is in the atmosphere below us. And you see a lot more water in the Arctic. You see this plume of water that is similar to what you would get over the plains, only this is in the Arctic. Now it's summertime in the Arctic, but these pool of very dry, cold air has been getting smaller and smaller, and it's getting more and more moist in the Arctic. More moisture in the Arctic is the biggest prediction of my geology professors, because what's happening at the North Pole will eventually happen at the South Pole. If we click around to the South Pole, this is in an eight image cycle. You get down to, you see that's the Pacific right now. And you get down to Antarctica. This is more, right now, Antarctica is quite quiet. And again, the dryness of the air is a key feature of polar air. And so when we get really hot here in the CL area, it's because a blob of polar air, which is very dry and easy to heat up, gets over us. And it's quite boring. But if you look at the anomaly, you see that these blobs are on the horizon. And if you look at this gives you the low pressures. I've noticed that Antarctica is ringed by these ever stronger low pressures, like a ring. The geology, they talked in astrophysics about how the global weather worked. And these are all evidence that the exchange of air between Antarctica and the mid-latitudes is accelerating. And you get deeper and deeper low pressures and more of them. And they have to see this is all precipitation. And the more precipitation you get on these ice shelves and ice sheets, which has been increasing, the more you insulate them. And the more, if there's a rare heat spell during the summer where you're above freezing, it melts to liquid water and it goes down the cracks.
So if Thor, sorry to interrupt. Can you show that time lapse just the facts and data related to what you just said about the southern pole is getting more rain?
Right now, it is not getting any rain, and unfortunately, this site does not have a time lapse.
Okay.
You just get an image, but you get other information such as the precipitable water. I've seen this blue color actually touch the coast here. I've seen it where you have moisture over each part of Antarctica in levels that was more equivalent to being here in North America. So today it's quiet, but in recent past, in last year, I mean, there was like 12 instances where it got extreme in it. And maybe the biggest one is the anomaly of the sea temperature. This ring of the ocean water is gradually warming around Antarctica. At the point that this water gets underneath these ice shelves, and water is densest at 4 degrees Celsius, it will cause these ice shelves to have crevasses from the underside. And that is what caused the Larsen B was right up here in this peninsula, right about where this dotted line is. But the Larsen C is here. This is the Ron, this is the Ross, this is the Avery. All of these big ice sheets are showing signs of forming undersea crevasses and getting additional snowfall and melt pools. So if we just take what we learned from the collapse of these two ice shelves up here and apply it to these other ice shelves, and it seems to be functioning. You see, this is the Arctic Circle here,
Yep.
about 60 degrees north. We see that these low pressures and even the elevation of Antarctica doesn't seem to matter. And so it's like it's shrinking. And in other words, the more energy you put in the world as a whole, the more energy shows up in the poles.
And so though there's no time lapse, Tor, is there a way to click through day by day or month from month?
There is a monthly temperature. This is the better one. This is the global sea surface map. This does map from 1985 through what it is currently at.
There we go. So these kinds of trends that you've showed me in the past really made my eyes widen. Like, oh my gosh. I mean, if you go back to that blue to red graph.
Well, this one, you're just going to see how it's changed over time. This is
here we go.
In 1985. Here it is. It starts to show more warmth around 1990. But again, they have very accurate satellite data. Most of the ocean was cold. As you see, there's a lot of blue on this, which means it was below normal.
Right.
You get up to around 2000. This is one of the big El Ninos. El Ninos were the water on this, you kind of get a blowtorch off South America. It's a well-known feature because the Pacific oscillates. And that was a record things. But again, things just gradually warm up. Here we are in about 2005. You see more warmth.
Wow, look at that.
Yeah.
So this orangey reddish, that's the warm spots in the oceans. Right. And the blue are the cold spots.
Right. So here's 2015, and that was a record year.
Yep.
Because it was an El Nino. But I want to just sort of scroll up to where we are now, and you can just see it just gets firier and firier.
Yeah.
I mean, this is up till March. That's when they have the data. But if you look at the trend, the oceans are getting extremely hot very, very fast.
Yeah. When you say extremely, what is the degree change? Are we talking half a degree, quarter degree?
Well, the trick about the ocean is you're not just heating the surface. In the middle of the Pacific, they estimate it goes down 2,000 meters.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, all the atmosphere, if you condense this, is about 10 meters, about 30 feet, if you were to liquid. This is 2,000 meters. I mean, when they say that 91% of the heat of the Earth is because CO2 and other gases, soot, everything else, dust, nucleate clouds over the oceans, it's going into the oceans. Because if I go here and I look at the oceans, this is what it is today. And this plume out of Asia is just like a blowtorch, because all the dust out of Asia nucleates the clouds here. You get a similar one around here, and the Mediterranean was hitting at one point 7 to 9 degrees Celsius warmer than normal. So a lot of what we've done is we've changed the clouds over the oceans, which just allows more sunlight into them, and it heats up the water.
Yeah. Thank you for clarifying the temperature differential over time, is significant. It's statistically significant. And we know that there are seasonality, like you said, the El Nino blowtorch. But as you did that time lapse, even though there were these higher temperature events for some months, if you look as Thor was just scrolling through the time lapse manually, it's very clear that the ocean is warming. And what I know as a sailor is with that temperature increase, we have more acidification or more acid chemistry in the ocean, which is causing the Great Barrier Reef and other world reefs to bleach. And we're seeing in the Pacific Northwest, I'm on the water every weekend teaching sailing. I saw whales and a lot more sea life 4.5 years ago, and just recently saw a whale. But that had been a year hiatus since I last saw a whale in southern Puget Sound, because the salmon, which is their favorite food of choice, which I have great respect for because that's one of my favorite foods of choice, is far less plentiful because of acidification, because of pollution, different fertilizer that gets emptied into Puget Sound. So we're seeing these changes in the biodiversity on the waters that I sail. And are you seeing, if we move now to the evangelizing, are you seeing minds changing when you share this data like you've shared with me? Do people go, oh my gosh, and they then start to ask themselves, okay, what can I do to help mitigate this? What are you seeing when you speak to that group on Sundays and other groups that you've been speaking to?
The honest truth is not much.
Why do you think that is?
I think, now, if I were to say, you need to move, and you make a big change, which is something you can relate to because you just did it, it takes you a while to adjust, to accept, to really process and do that.
Yeah.
When I say that my geology professors predicted that sea level could rise as fast as a foot per year, cognitively, people just, it's like checks out. To say that the forest could burn in a firestorm, they kind of check out. This is a map of the precipitable water in the world. And if you've been studying this, I don't have a time lapse of this, but if you've been studying it as long as it used to be a fairly tight band. Now you get little plumes all the way up to the Arctic. And these little projections down here, it's like tendrils. That's my funnel from 25 million years ago. That's what I drew. So I had a running map up to this for 40 years, plus I studied it. Most people don't have that map. So I'm really beginning to think, if we cannot come together and really understand the gravity of the issue before us, how is it going to be handled? Because I'm an optimist in the long run. But I see that this crisis is building so fast, that heat is getting down to the Arctic and the Antarctic so fast that it's going to cause things to collapse, or it has a very high risk to do that. Now, the good news is, at the point that you do face that situation, that ice is beginning to collapse, sea levels are beginning to rise fast, the climate has gone crazy, the financial cost of nations, particularly China and India and Europe and the United States, they can all afford to put up a substantial amount of material in the stratosphere, like volcanoes do, to cool the Earth down. And I mention that not because I think it's a solution to climate change. I don't see it at all, but it buys you time. Because if you really do get into a scenario like what I see playing out in Antarctica, and ice shelves start collapsing, because they will just start collapsing in rows. I mean, they all collapse together. It's not like the Thwaites is going to be the first, and then you get a 10-year delay, and then another one's going. Once the energy level gets high enough for these guys to go, they're all gonna go very close to each other.
Yeah.
And that's a panic situation, because basically everything in the first 20 feet of elevation, the insurance company saying we can't insure you, you can't finance it, and your property value is going to go to zero. And you're in a mad race to build seawalls, which will only last, what, how long? 20 years? If you can build them. So what's the better choice? Put a bunch of stuff in the stratosphere to chill the Earth. Now, I mentioned this not as a happy solution, because there are going to be strong losers. If you're in Alaska or Russia or Northern Europe, you're facing Arctic conditions. But if you're in any of these coastal cities around the world, Beijing, Shanghai, the Pearl River Delta, Miami, Boston, a good part of New York, all these cities around the world that were port cities that thrived on trade, they will just, they're facing obliteration. And I think that's too big a shock for the world to handle.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you put a lot of stuff in the stratosphere, it buys you time to get the carbon out of the atmosphere and the sea. Again, you've got about 1 to 2 trillion tons of carbon to remove. It's a lot of carbon. It's not the sort of thing you can say, we're just going to stop emitting. And that'd be great if we stopped emitting. But you've already got enough momentum in this train to say, you got a problem.
That was the thing that had me pivot my business focus from being sustainable business to regenerative business. Because if we, all 8+ billion of us, stopped burning fossil fuels, stopped traveling in our vehicles, stop flying, etc., we would still overheat because of all of that momentum in the atmosphere, the heat already accelerating.
Well, we put, again, that's a ton of CO2. That's like 2,000 cubic kilometers of CO2 that we put into the atmosphere and the ocean.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
Yeah. So is there anything that you've not yet said that you would love to say? Because we're going to need to sadly wind down our time together. You got maybe a minute or two.
I want to leave this on a happy note, that's saying whatever crisis we face, because the climate is going berserk and sea levels are going to rise, that you're going to get an international cooperation to put something in the atmosphere to buy time. There's going to be, again, carbon capture is going to go from a sleepy little thing to a huge thing.
Yeah.
Planes can fly in the stratosphere and scatter a very fine dust that blocks sunlight. It means that Seattle, where I live, might have snow on the ground 3 months out of the year. Again, that's a lot colder than we historically have been, but if that's what it takes to prevent the poles from collapsing, you have to say that the cost, it's the lesser of two evils.
Yeah.
But if you look at the future of how we're going to be dealt with in the lesser of two evils, how history is going to play out becomes quite clear. It isn't the way I want, it isn't the way I would hope for, but I do have to accept, if we get into this situation, this is what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
And we could have this conversation about all sorts of things, like AI and demographics, and how our finances work, and retirement, and all of these things. They all have that pattern, because I've thought through enough to say, oh, it really has a lot of momentum. The oceans are getting a lot hotter. And that's getting down to the poles. This is what comes next. And this is what I can plan on, take confidence in, and I'm just not worried about it anymore. Saying, oh, okay, it's just that's the way it's going to play out.
Well, Tor, I know I want you back if you're willing to come back. I always learn so much from you, my friend. So just to summarize, what Thor has really been sharing with us is this 5-step process of identifying the problem, digging for the truth, looking for the facts and primary sources. We didn't really talk about the reflect and meditate much, but this idea that there is kind of a spiritual side to what we need to be thinking about, not just behavior, our mindsets. How do we align more toward what is nature, what is healthy for the planet, and then validating our thinking with others, like what Thor did with his brother and what Thor does for me. And then finally sharing stories, because stories are sticky. So next week, I am going to be my own guest. I'm going to talk a little bit about this really transformative time, the last 6 months of 2026, since January of this year. And specifically, the challenges of shedding stuff, everything from houses to my wife and I, Margaret and I, have done 2 Swedish death cleanses so that our children don't have to sort through all of our stuff. So please join us next Monday at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central Time on k4hd.com. Thank you so much for investing your time with us. On behalf of Thor, Rebel, our producer, and our entire Talk4 Media, please stay healthy, stay safe. We need you. We're better together.
Thank you for listening to Regenerate with Captain Dave on K4HD Radio. We invite you to give yourself grace and embrace the messy middle. See you every Monday at 10 a.m. Pacific Time. Until then, you got this.